Greetings. Today we're going to be talking about how to read. Now when I say how to read, I don't mean that we're going to be learning how to read. I'm assuming that you already know how to read. But we're going to be looking at how to get more out of your reading. And then actually in the next two videos that are coming out after this, we're going to be looking at how to buy books. The next video is going to be about principles for buying books, and then the one after that will show you the process of how to evaluate a book that you're going to buy. And how do you know it's a good book if you haven't read it yet? Well, there are certain things to look for. So even if this video is kind of basic and you know it all already, I encourage you to still look at the next two videos coming out, because I'm pretty sure that you'll learn something in those videos. First, we need to talk about why you should be reading. Reading has fallen out of favor in today's society, and that's a shame. But it's an even bigger shame that Christians don't read as much as they used to. Now, I know it's a lot easier just to go onto YouTube and watch a video, and it's easier to do that than to pull out a book and read the book. And not that I've got anything against videos, obviously, but reading still is an important part of the Christian life. Throughout history, Christians have actually generally been the most literate people in any society. Christians used to read a lot. And as the saying goes, he who reads, leads. This is why Christianity has had such a big influence on our world, at least in prior centuries. Another reason that reading is important is because God thinks it's important. I mean, think about it. Of all the ways that God could have chosen to reveal himself to us, he revealed himself primarily through a book. He could have chosen any means he wanted to, and God decided to write a book. Well, there are other reasons why we should be reading, but you get the picture. All right, so let's look at some tips for reading, some tips for how to get the most out of the books that you read. First of all, I want to talk about how much time you spend reading. Now, this is going to vary for different people because everybody has different schedules and different abilities. For some people, reading 10 to 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week is a very good reading plan. That can be helpful because if you're reading a little bit every day, then not a lot of time passes between each reading session, and so you don't forget what you read last time you picked up that book. For other people, it might be better to have a longer time of reading, but only do it once or twice a week. So for instance, you might read for an hour once a week. Now, for people who have slow brains like myself, this method seems to work a little better for me. When I read a couple minutes a day, when I pick up a book on one day, I have to reread what I read last time just so that I can refresh myself. And since I read very slowly, I read a paragraph, then think about it and contemplate it, and then read another paragraph, and then think about it some more. And so really a short reading time is not as productive for me as a long time of reading, like an hour or so. Next, let's talk about staying awake. This can be a problem for a lot of people, and it's a problem for me too. Staying awake while you're reading. So one of the methods that I've found that helps me stay awake is if you take a tack and turn it upside down in the seat that you're sitting in. Okay, probably don't want to do that. But I have found that if I'm sitting in a hard wooden chair, as opposed to stretched out on a soft couch, I don't fall asleep as easy. So maybe finding a new chair would keep you from falling asleep. Well, next I want to talk about skimming or speed reading through a book. If you're able to do this, this can be a big advantage. I mean, reading more in a less amount of time, obviously a plus. So for those of you who can do that and actually retain what you read, I would suggest that you speed read because it can be very productive. So if you haven't looked into speed reading, that might be something you want to look into. However, those of us with a slow brain, like myself, when I speed read, I really don't retain a lot of what I read. I like to read slowly and think about what I'm reading. But I do use skimming or speed reading as a tool. Say, for instance, I have to read something that's not really that important, well, then I may speed read through it. Or let's say I'm reading a book on a subject that I'm already very familiar with, well, then I can read that book a lot faster because I don't have to stop and think about what I'm reading. I already know the subject pretty well. Another situation where I might use speed reading is if I have to reread a book for a class or like a book club sort of thing. If I've already read it, I kind of know what the book is about, and maybe I just need a quick refresher, and so I can speed read it, and it saves me a little bit of time. That being said, I never speed read a book that is, say, hard to read because maybe it was written in a different century. I like to read old books, and I can't speed read those. I just can't do it. Or let's say it's a subject that I'm new to, or let's just say it's a book that I really, really, really want to know thoroughly the contents of that book. In cases like that, I don't speed read. I do my slow reading. Well, speaking of remembering what you're reading, a lot of people like to take notes, and I would suggest that you do that. That's a very helpful way to retain the information that you're reading. Now, some people like to write notes in the book itself. They may write notes in the margin, or they may underline things that they thought were particularly interesting, or a quote that they want to remember. And I actually don't do that. Now, there are a few reasons for this. First of all, it seems a little weird for me to write in a nice copy of a book. Let's say it's a real nice hardback book. Just doesn't seem right to me. Not that there's anything wrong about writing in your books. In fact, some of the greatest people in the history of the world and some of America's founding fathers used to write in their books. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I have a different way of doing things. So what I like to do is get a notepad like this here and tear off a sheet from that notepad, and I usually write the title of the book on the top parts and the author's name. And then as I am reading and I find something interesting, I write it down. So I'll take a note like this, and don't look at my bad spelling. But what I do is when I find something interesting, I write down the page number, and then I usually put down a T, an M, or a B. That stands for top, middle, or bottom of the page. And then I'll write down a little note of why I'm making a note, just something to remind me of why I thought that was an interesting point or a useful quote or that sort of thing. So it's kind of like having my own personalized index. And this can be very helpful when I'm looking for information in a book, because instead of having to read through 450 pages of a book, I really just have to look at 3 or 4 of my notes, and I can find all the information that I wanted to remember. If I'm looking for a quote of a famous person, I don't have to read through 450 pages. I can just read a couple of these notes. So in 5 or 10 minutes, I can find anything I need. I just have to remember which book that quote was in. I found this way of note-taking to be very helpful when I teach as well. For instance, again, if I want to use a quote and I know what book it's in, I don't have to read through all those pages. I simply have to look at my notes. Now, if I had just underlined that quote, I'd have to search really, really hard to find it. And so, again, I think my method is a little better than underlining things. Not that there's anything wrong with underlining. But it's also helpful when I have to teach on a particular subject. Let's say that I have 10 books on a particular subject and I want to refresh myself on what those books say. Well, if I'm preparing for a class, I don't want to read through those 10 books all over again, but I can go back through my notes, again, 4 or 5 pages per each book, and I can do that in less than an hour most times. And so I've just found it to be a very helpful way of putting down the information that I want to learn, that I want to remember, putting it down on paper, and I can find it easily again. Well, as we close, I would like to encourage you to become a reader, if you're not already. I don't know of any great man or woman, Christian man or woman, throughout history that wasn't a reader. Christians used to read, and they used to read a lot. So if you want to be like them and keep it contramundum, read. Well, till next time, we'll see you later.